You ready?
Oh, yeah.
Let's fire it up.
This is the Hometown Holler. I'm Daniel Earls.
And I'm Quinn Ray.
Well, for the second episode in a row, we are remote. We are on the road in the community.
Yeah, we are.
So people are going to hear maybe some traffic in the background, maybe a train.
Perhaps
that
a train.
famous Alamance County, Burlington train station. And today, we are welcoming a very special guest to the Holler.
Super excited about this.
Justice Anita Earls is on the podcast today. Justice Earls is on the North Carolina Supreme Court, an associate justice. Before that, she has led a very distinguished career of public service. In 1998, President Bill Clinton appointed her as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice.
Wow.
Yeah, and then in 2007, she founded the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, which she directed until 2017 when she decided to run for an open seat on the state Supreme Court. She won her race, and I will say handily, and now joined the court in 2019 and is serving in through 2026 is when the next your seat's up for election. Yeah,
that's right.
That's right. And today, this is the big news. Justice
Yep.
Earls is making history as the first member of the state Supreme Court to appear on the Hometown Holler. So, Justice, I guess that's a dubious honor, maybe,
Yeah.
but Justice Earls, thank you and welcome to the Hometown Holler.
No, thank you. I'm excited to have a first to put on my list.
Well, I guess I'll start with this question.
Sure.
This is a question for Quinn. I grew up watching, and I still watch, like Judge Judy and Judge Joe Brown, the People's Court. So I guess I feel like I already kind of know everything. But for Quinn, for somebody who's maybe new to the judicial system,
Yeah, that's right.
what is your job? What is it that you do?
Right. So state courts in general hear most of the cases that most people are involved in. There's so much attention on the U.S. Supreme Court, but in fact, by many multiples, most litigation happens in state court. Half is civil, half is criminal. My job on the Supreme Court is to review the law that's applied by the trial courts. So we only hear appeals. If you want to have a jury trial, that's going to happen in either district or superior court at the trial court level.
So it's not necessarily a matter of guilt or innocence by the time it gets to you.
Well, it's not a question of the facts. The fact finders are either a judge or a jury at the trial level. As an appellate court, we review whether they got the law right. But whether they got the law right can affect whether someone is innocent or guilty, whether someone who's injured in a car accident is going to get compensated by an insurance company, whether a worker who gets harmed on the job is going to get workers' compensation. Those are all, there are real world implications of every case we decide.
So are you as busy as our county court? So, I get a traffic ticket, go to Alamance County, and it's just out the doors with people having court every day. So the judges are just rolling through people. Is that kind of how it works at the Supreme Court? Are you busy every day?
No,
Okay.
it's a little different. And I will say, remember, we have two levels of appellate courts. So we have, since 1967, we've had a court of appeals, 15 judges. They sit in 3 panels. Everyone in the state votes for those judges, as well as the 7 judges on the Supreme Court.
Okay.
The Court of Appeals hears more cases than we do, a few hundred a year. We actually only, this past year, issued opinions in about 80 cases.
Oh, wow.
So last year we had four sessions of 2 weeks of 20 cases each, if you will. So so far this year we've not heard oral arguments. We're about to go into a 2-week session in February. So our courtroom is open every day, but you're not going to find us sitting on the bench every day the way you do in the trial courts.
So so then what occupies your time when you're not in session, when you're not sitting and hearing cases?
If you looked at some of our 80, 100-page decisions, you would
That's what that
understand
is. Okay.
that we are working on writing opinions. We are also working on deciding whether or not to hear a case. And that's really important for the people of North Carolina to understand that recently there's been a radical change in how our court operates. Up until now, so from 1967 until the present, if you had a case, say you had a car accident, you went to trial, you think the trial judge got the law wrong, you have the right to appeal to Court of Appeals, and at least 3 judges have to hear your appeal. Up until now, if one of those judges agreed with you, but the other 2 ruled against you, so you lost, you had the right to come to our Supreme Court and have all 7 justices hear your appeal and decide whether you or the other side is right about the law. In the budget bill, that was changed so that now you no longer have the right of appeal based on a dissent. That right has been taken away. And now our court decides whether or not we will hear your case, whether or not we think it is significant enough to be heard. So that, to me, is a very fundamental change that
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
nobody had heard about.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
I would like to think of myself as somebody who follows state politics,
Sure.
and this is a new one for me.
Right.
Just
So
slipping it in.
a question I have is, when deciding whether to hear a case, is it, show of hands? Okay, majority rules. Is it consensus? We all decide. I mean, who?
Yeah, how does that work?
How does that work? Yeah.
There are 2 different avenues to get to our court. If you are appealing from a Court of Appeals decision and you're timely, it takes 3 votes. So think about what that means if you have a highly fractionized court that's 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
Right.
It takes 3 votes, and then in certain types of cases where you're asking us to exercise our discretion to review, it actually takes 4 votes. So it's a high hurdle, and it means that if a 5-vote majority on the court has almost total control over the jurisprudence of the state.
Man, I guess this is going to kind of take us back a little bit, but just recently where the Supreme Court decided to re-listen to the maps, the gerrymandering that happened. So how does that get decided? Does one judge come in and say...
What you're saying, like when there's been a ruling,
There's
and then
been
we
a
decide to reverse that ruling, right? Yeah, that's a great question.
So that was a petition that was decided on a 5-2 partisan split. So the 5 Republican justices decided that it was okay to rehear the case, and a strongly worded dissent from the 2 Democrats on the court said that that was not proper, and that we had never done that before as a court, that changing the personnel in the court shouldn't change the law, especially the law in the same case. And so there's sharp differences in the court's views on whether or not that's proper.
So how does that work with, double jeopardy, right? I always thought if a case was done and closed,
Right.
like how does that work? And was this, you went into work one day and the 5 justices came into your office and said, this is what we're doing? They send you an email? How does it...
Well, let me just say, the double jeopardy concept is actually one about criminal law.
Right, criminal.
Okay.
And so if you've been tried and acquitted for a certain criminal offense, you can't be tried again. The state doesn't get a do-over.
Right.
Okay.
And it can get pretty complicated how those double jeopardy principles might apply in any given criminal case. So it's a somewhat basic right to explain, and it's a constitutional right, but it can be complicated in how it's applied. But it doesn't have the same. Well, there are similar doctrines in civil law. So again, my automobile accident case. Say you sue because you were hit by another car and you don't win, you can't, you lose. The case is over, you've lost. You can't go back and sue again.
Okay.
It wouldn't be double jeopardy. There's concepts, it's called res judicata and collateral estoppel, but you can't go back and sue a second time just because you lost the first time.
Man, her vocabulary.
I was going
is
to say,
way
I'm
out of
getting
my
flashback
league.
to my high school Latin right there. I won't ask you to comment on this, but one thing I find really interesting is some of the same justices and some of the same people that I know in this community who were very much opposed to what they consider to be an activist judiciary had no problem with going against legal precedent and reversing the maps
That's
that
right.
had been approved. And I'll just observe that personally, I found that to be peculiar.
Super peculiar.
Super peculiar. Now, a question. You look like you had a question. Were you going to ask? Yeah.
It was still kind of going on the same thing. And I know we have some time here. But so in 2018, you argued went to the U.S. Supreme Court and was the main lawyer for the plaintiffs of suing North Carolina for their gerrymandering. And you got 28 maps or something, 28. I'm not quite sure, but I know you went to the U.S. Supreme Court and argued for these maps. So how did it switch from 2018 to now? Because, I mean, it's a big thing. People are talking about these maps, and we talked about it on our last show for the past 2 years, and we know it's supposed to be every 10 years. So what was the decision in 2018 that you argued at a federal level, and how did that trickle down to us to now we're still being gerrymandered?
Right. So, in fact, the cases that I was involved in, I was involved in a case involving racial gerrymandering, and that's where the U.S. Supreme Court summarily affirmed. So, without even hearing oral arguments, said we agree with the trial court, and the trial court said that many of our state legislative districts were racially gerrymandered. So then there was a redrawing, and new plaintiffs said, hold on, you didn't draw them improperly regarding race, but you did regarding partisanship and that they were a partisan gerrymander. So I participated at the trial level in a case about partisan gerrymandering, which did ultimately go to the U.S. Supreme Court. I didn't argue in the Supreme Court, but because by the time it got to the Supreme Court, I had left the Southern Coalition for Social Justice and I was running for office. But the U.S. Supreme Court said, we're not going to touch this whole issue of partisan gerrymandering. We're going to leave it to the state courts.
Okay. And here we are.
Yep.
So you mentioned running for office, and this is something I want to jump to. I imagine that running as a judicial candidate is pretty distinct from running for other offices, for running for lieutenant governor, or state house, state senate. How is it unique? What are the, I guess, idiosyncrasies that come with running for a seat on, to a branch of government that emphasizes impartiality and is above partisan politics, at least in theory?
So a lot of states elect their judges, some in nonpartisan races, some as partisan. And in North Carolina, we have gone back and forth. When I ran in 2018, it was the first time in many years that the Supreme Court seats were partisan. So when Justice Morgan ran in 2016, it was a nonpartisan race for the Supreme Court. The partisan affiliation of Court of Appeals judges was indicated on the ballot in 2016. And there's this really fascinating, for me, I'm not a political scientist, but having done a lot of voting rights litigation, I put a lot of political scientists on as expert witnesses. And there's this bizarre phenomenon where 500,000 voters in this state skipped over the Supreme Court race in 2016 and voted for the Court of Appeals candidates.
Wow.
So something about knowing the partisan label made a difference in who participated in the election. But
is that a good thing?
Well,
because we know people are just pulling the team lever right now.
Right, but so if voters find that party identification is their best indication that their values align with the candidate's values, I don't know that that's a bad thing.
Okay.
I think the real question for voters to assess is how do those individuals that they elect in partisan elections, how do they perform on the bench? And that's where, again, there's a real distinct difference between how Republicans who are elected to the appellate court are performing versus how Democrats are performing. And my data for that, this is just a data observation, and people can draw whatever conclusions they want to. But I looked at every opinion that our court issued in the 2-year period when the court was 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And there were some 300, the numbers, I'm close, but there's something in that 2-year period from January of 2021 through December of 2022, we issued something like 315 opinions. We were unanimous in 215 of those. So two-thirds of them, the court was unanimous.
Wow.
But in the remaining, the Republicans on the court disagreed with each other only 7 times. The Democrats disagreed with each other something like 48 times.
That sounds like Democrats.
And the Democrats were all on one side and the Republicans were all on one side in only 43 cases. So the Democrats disagreed with each other more than they voted as a bloc. And to me, that suggests that the Democrats on the court, once elected, saw themselves as independent judges assessing the facts and the law and applying it to the best of their ability. And so that's what I think voters have a right to expect of of judges on all of our courts. Once you're elected, do you apply the law fairly, to the best of your ability without adhering to a party caucus or a party line, if you will?
I mean, I think that goes to the next question, because in 18, you ran on like a phrase, keeping NC courts fair and independent. But we know you're a proud Democrat. You talk about being a Democrat. How do you manage that sitting behind the bench? How do you keep a fair and independent mindset without feeling pressure from the constituents that voted for you? Like, we wanted a Democrat judge to do Democrat things.
Well, except honestly, my sense from the voters that I talked with as I was campaigning and when I went door to door, and even now, what Democrats are asking for is that we guarantee equal justice under the law and that we're fair and impartial. That's what they're asking us to do, and actually, the campaign slogan that meant the most to me was that I would rule without fear or favor. The notion that I would not be subject to outside pressures, wherever those pressures come from. And quite frankly, the pressures are from the other political party more than my political party.
Clarence Thomas.
Well, no, I think that voters should ask whether a judge, once they're on the court, is going to be worried about which of their opinions will be appearing in an attack ad the next time they run. Is that what's going through the judge's mind? Or does the judge have the courage to apply the law fairly and equally in every case? And so I think so if you ask me, how do I carry out my commitment to voters to be fair and impartial? My answer to that question is, let's start with an understanding of what unbiased means, and I think that you can come closest to being fair and impartial when you recognize what your own biases actually are, because we all have them.
Yes.
And so that's why, to me, understanding the science behind concepts of implicit bias, whether it's implicit racial bias along gender lines, socioeconomic status, age, disability, there are all sorts of ways in which we have preconceived notions. And so as a judge, it's important for me to understand what my own preconceived notions are and then correct for them. Then make sure that I'm not letting them play into any case that comes before me, that I'm basing it on the facts as they were decided by the trial court. That's my way of being fair and impartial.
Wow, well said. Yeah, that was really.
I'm getting learned over here.
Absolutely. So, looking ahead, when it comes to, I'm going to say not the long term, but more the near term to intermediate term future of our state. Do you see, when you kind of look at the political landscape, is the glass half empty or is the glass half full?
I feel like we're at an inflection point in North Carolina, and to me, to answer that question depends on what I think about who's going to turn out.
Right.
If we have robust turnout, if we have higher than ever before levels of participation, if we create a democratic culture, a small d, a culture in which
a participatory government, right?
And remember that for almost all of my career doing voting rights work, I did that work in a nonpartisan fashion. Even at the Justice Department, where yes, I was in a Democratic administration, I was a political appointee, but our job was to enforce the laws, no matter who were the victims of those laws being violated. So we never said, oh, we're only going to bring cases that benefit Democrats. Yeah, right. And obviously, working in a nonpartisan organization, there's just many examples I can give in my career of why my commitment to voting rights is a nonpartisan commitment. And so if we have a democracy that incorporates everyone's voice, then the glass is more than half full. Because I have such great faith in the people of North Carolina. What worries me is if we are excluding voices and if people don't participate, whether voluntarily by not showing up, or because the election administration hurdles, the changes to same-day registration now, and I want to say February 9th is the registration deadline for the primary. It is more important than it's been in past years that people get registered in advance, because the same-day registration is a provisional ballot. It is no longer automatically counted.
Wow. Man, this is why it's important to have impartial judges on the Supreme Court.
Absolutely, and it is strange to me when an issue like voting, I mean that to me seems like that's a team we can all play on, right? The more people
you would think.
and so it is strange to live in a society that increasingly sees access to voting as a partisan issue.
Well, and how do you handle that with your colleagues? There are other justices, right? Like, part of me would want to be like, what the hell are you thinking, guys? Like, we can all look at this. You're clearly intelligent, and we know this is unfair. How do you navigate those waters with something so should be impartial and nonpartisan, but clearly they're playing the partisan game?
Well, we issue our opinions with, written explanations and justifications, and our views are expressed in our opinions. So, for example, the voter ID case that our court reheard. After having decided it, the majority in the 2022 court, the 4 Democrat, 3 Republican court, reviewed the trial court. A trial court had a trial, had witnesses, heard evidence, took testimony, and concluded that not the requirement itself, but just the way it had been implemented by the statute. So not the mere fact that you have to have a voter ID, but the way the voter ID law was being implemented was intentionally racially discriminatory. That wasn't my court concluding that was a trial court. So in 2022, we looked at the evidence. We said, yes, the trial court properly applied the legal standard. They applied Arlington Heights, which is a U.S. Supreme Court that tells you how to decide whether something is intentionally racially discriminatory. The trial court applied that U.S. Supreme Court law and found that the statute was racially discriminatory. So we affirmed. We said, trial court, you got it right. On rehearing, the court said, we're not going to use Arlington, we're not going to follow the U.S. Supreme Court when we interpret our state guarantees to equal protection. We think that the standard should be different, and therefore the plaintiffs lose.
Yeah, so I guess I'm asking, so I said, I'm a local elected official, and I'll call one of my board members up and be like, what are you thinking? Or this
You actually do that?
Oh, for sure.
Oh, wow.
I mean, we call each
Okay.
other and we talk. So are you not just calling up Paul and be like, Paul, come on, man, you know this is not
Paul,
right.
baby, what's up? Yeah.
Is that how the relationships are, or is it really you're just writing your 800-page opinion and moving forward?
And that's where the conversation is
Right.
happening.
The conversation is through text.
Well, I think you raise an interesting question that it varies among courts across the country. So, there's a lot written about how the U.S. Supreme Court deliberates. I've been fortunate to participate in groups with other state Supreme Court justices, and they have different processes for how they deliberate. And so I think it's an interesting question. Yeah. How do you structure an appellate court? Because it's 7 people, right? There's nothing I get to decide by myself.
Right.
You
shouldn't.
I need at least 3 other votes for any majority opinion that I want to issue. When I write dissents, I can write those on my own. But and so it's an interesting question. How do you structure it in a way that will foster more collegiality and deliberation? But also, I think that it's impacted by the personalities, inevitably. And there's been a lot written about how how Justice Scalia and Ginsburg were good friends, and they would go on vacation together. I can't tell you any stories like that.
So what I'm hearing
on a tube
is
behind
that,
a boat.
well, I was going to say what I'm hearing is that it's a lot of like 4 a.m. parking deck, show up in the corner, roll in the window, quick stern words through the window, very very hushed voices, and then
That's
speeding
what it
out
feels
back
like,
home.
right?
Justice Earls, thank you so much for your time. Before you take off, we have a little gift bag that we'll share with you after just for coming all this way to Alamance County, North by God, Carolina.
Well, did we even mention that she's going to be on the ballot this year?
No.
So
2026.
Allison Riggs will be on the ballot.
Allison Riggs, yeah, and there is a primary for
Yeah, it's
Democratic.
really important.
So Laura Cubbage and Allison Riggs are both on the primary for a seat to join you on the
That's
state
right.
Supreme
Well,
Court.
Allison Riggs is on the court
appointed,
now.
right?
She's appointed. She's
Governor Cooper
incumbent.
appointed
Right.
her, and she is the person who has argued twice in the U.S. Supreme Court. I have never been able to argue. I've sat at a council table, but she has argued twice. She is an incredibly brilliant jurist with extensive appellate experience, and she's been working really hard to get out to the voters of the state. But I want to thank you all. This is an amazing program. I've listened to some of the other podcasts, and it's so important that people are informed, but that you all make it fun and entertaining. So thank you.
Well, thanks. I mean,
Yeah, we're trying our darndest.
our darndest. I think in one of the episodes we said we're going to holler, but I think you corrected us and said we're probably going to squeal.
It's squealing or hollering at something. Justice Earls, thank you so much. We wish you all the best, and we look forward to hopefully another conversation sometime down the road.
Yeah, awesome.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.